Welcome to this week's Rocks Back Pages podcast. My name is Barney Hoskyns. I'm here with my colleague Mark Pringle.
Hello, Barney.
I'm also here with our very special guest, John Mendelssohn, one of the most legendary music writers of the last... How many years shall we say, John?
4
years. Yeah, or decades or millennia. Let's just stick with the number 4. Welcome, John. It's an absolute joy to have you here.
The pleasure is entirely my own, Barney. Hello, Mark.
Hello, John.
We're going to be talking with John about his own career, also specifically about Led Zeppelin and Kate Bush. Kate Bush is our featured artist of the week. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant are the audio interview from 1998 talking about Walking into Clarksdale, their second album as Page and Plant. And we're going to kick off with an excerpt from that interview.
Now, I read on MTV online today that the album was named after a museum.
No, not a museum.
That's what it said.
You know, we have to battle with this stuff all the time, you know, like biographies that are wrong and things like that. It's just a fact.
What is it? Tell me what it is. Just a town, that's what I thought it was, yeah. It says named after a museum in Clarksdale.
Oh, it's so dull, these people. That's MTV audience today. No, but I mean, if you listen to the song, Christ, it's got nothing to do with the museum at all.
Right. I don't know where they got that from. I wonder if it was before they talked to you, or they just, deduced it somehow, if it was after they talked to you.
Well, they probably went, Clarksdale, what's there?
Right.
Dunkin' Donuts.
This is a very short interview. Beginning of the interview, Plant's bemoaning, howling when told that Billboard are up next. And in that one, as you hear, they were mocking the fact that MTV thought they'd named the album Walking to Clarksdale after the museum in Clarksdale.
Is that a blues museum?
It's a blues museum. So yeah, that's that.
So Clarksdale, Mississippi, being one of the sort of fount of the Delta blues. So
it's just so typical of them, though. I mean, this is the sort of thing that distinguished their early career. They take that Monkees song, they retitle it, and they slightly repackage it, and now we're asked to believe that it's some exciting new thing.
What Monkees song?
Well, Last Train to Clarksville.
Right, yes. It just, that hadn't occurred to me. That's Clarksville rather than Clarksdale, but nice try.
Well, as I say, they retitled it in much the same way that they call
Okay, yeah.
They stole from Howlin' Wolfheads.
I think to put this into context, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. Jimmy Page was the guitarist and founder and boss, really, of Led Zeppelin. Robert Plant was the singer that he recruited from the Midlands. By 1998, these guys had a real love-hate relationship, I think, which you can't necessarily detect in the audio. Perhaps it's just not long enough.
Well, I mean, you can hear, because Page turns up late, and you can hear sort of vague undercurrent of irritation.
Why is Jimmy late? Yes.
Plant's voice.
I mean, it's fascinating for me, and I should sort of declare this because I wrote an oral history of Led Zeppelin, and one of the things that becomes rapidly very obvious when you're researching that is that at this point in time, certainly, and probably 20 years ago, as when this interview was done, these two men really did not like each other very much. And it's a pretty open secret that the reason the Led Zeppelin reunion tour has not happened is because Robert can't stand being in the same room as Jimmy.
Also, Robert can't hit the high notes anymore.
Also lots of things, but I want to bring John in here because John plays a unique role in the Led Zeppelin story in that he reviewed not just the first but the second Led Zeppelin album for Rolling Stone, and horrifying as it may seem to some of you out there, these were not positive, affirmative reviews, and John is one of the few rock critics, really, who hasn't a good word, I think, to say about Zeppelin and their ilk.
Yeah, well, in many ways, I feel that I should disavow what I said at the time. I mean, I did passionately hate them, but it was preposterous, really, that I should be writing about them, because never liked the blues. I've never had any interest in the blues. I've always been about melody and interesting lyrics. They had neither. So what they did very well, was kind of, I missed it completely because key things that I always looked for in music were completely absent. Decades later, when I resumed playing the drums, I hear that early stuff, and I marvel at Bonham's playing, just from the standpoint of the brilliance of the rhythm sections playing. It's quite notable, but as I say, just very, very far from my own taste. So I wrote sort of an extremely dull, sober review for my college newspaper, and then Rolling Stone published it. And then I discovered that they were so irritated, Led Zeppelin were so irritated that they threatened me from the stage of the Anaheim Convention Center, which delighted me to a great extent. I felt myself becoming more famous.
Yes, you were almost famous.
Yeah, indeed, and I enjoyed that feeling. So then, when I was asked to review the second one, I went into full smartass mode and just ridiculed them mercilessly, to my discredit.
I don't know if it's your discredit, John, because I always had a very ambivalent relationship with Led Zeppelin. There's bits of them I've really, really liked. I go through jags now of listening to them for a great deal and then not listening to them for months on end. And they were overblown and pompous, and a lot of the things that you said. And also they appealed to a type of audience that I suspect you and I would both, to some extent, despise, the quaalude, swilling...
Can you swill a quaalude?
Well, with beer.
You have.
Well,
with beer.
I've found that you can if you liquefy it first. But yeah, the thing is, I feel a certain amount of embarrassment about really everything I wrote, because it's become more and more apparent to me that people nowadays object to the fact that you don't really see anything but positive reviews. And they think that that's a degradation of the form. Well, in some ways, I've come to see music criticism as kind of really a very silly thing to be doing in the first place, by virtue of the fact that I can't explain why I enjoy the things I do. If in 1969, when I did that writing, somebody enjoyed listening to screechy blues and a guitarist wildly overplaying, as Page always did, why is that less valid than my liking Stephen Sondheim? That which hits somebody else's musical G-spot and doesn't hit mine is perfectly valid for them, and for me to...
I have to say, my job means I read the stuff all day, every day of the week, and there's nothing more boring than a good review. I absolutely relish bad reviews. They make me roar with laughter. And I have to say, this is a question for you, John, was when you were writing for the LA Times, did your editors ever take you to one side and say, listen, John, do you actually like rock music? Because
No, John Landau, who went on to manage Bruce Springsteen, said that.
I was slightly shocked because I can't remember who it was, but I read a review which was positive.
It was a Neil Young and Crazy Horse review that we added about 3 weeks ago.
And it stopped me in my tracks. He likes it.
We were all in shock.
Not just about...
Mendo likes something.
But also the audience. You're fantastically vile about the audiences. I'm personally, I adore that stuff. I can understand why you're sort of, backing away from it. But from my standpoint as a consumer, it's fabulous.
Yeah, it's much more interesting to read that stuff. But, hurting people's feelings. And I have a lot of my own music on SoundCloud, and a few months ago, I looked at, I don't go to it periodically, I do check Facebook every 10 minutes in hope that somebody has liked something I've said, but not with SoundCloud. And I discovered that some guy had listened to every song that I had on SoundCloud, and about 10 seconds into each one, he'd commented, "This is crap. How do you come off insulting Led Zeppelin?" 45 years after the fact.
But I think it's worth interjecting at this point that even if you wrote something bad about Led Zeppelin now, they really couldn't have cared less. Whereas back then, the power that the music press had, this group that became such a giant band,
the mythical power.
But your reviews did really sting with them, particularly with the very thin-skinned Jimmy Page, and it sort of set up a real kind of animosity between Led Zeppelin and the press. I mean, there's this great story of Peter Grant calling the offices of the, I think, New Musical Express, IT, International Times, and Jonathan Green, who'd written a not very good review of, I think, Led Zeppelin 2, heard this menacing voice on the other end of the line saying, "Do you use your fingers for typing?" And it was Peter Grant, the manager. And they really did hate the press. And it may have been partly because they couldn't believe you could be so impolite about their work at that early stage.
But Barney, it didn't stop them selling millions of records. And so
of course not.
The power of the press has always been massively overstated.
Absolutely. I've come to believe and to recognize in my old age that even in the days when Rolling Stone wielded the most power, the only rock critics, if you will, and they didn't call themselves that, who mattered, were the program directors at radio stations.
Yeah.
I mean, what Lester Bangs might have written in Rolling Stone or John Landau, negligible in comparison to judgments being made by people whose names you would never know behind the scenes.
Yes. I think it's worth saying something about this audio interview in that it really does demonstrate the great difference between these two guys, between Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. Robert dominates the interview, as one might expect, and he's always loquacious and eloquent and amusing, and occasionally Jimmy sort of grunts something in his sort of slightly train spotterish way.
In his entirely fake sort of working class accent.
Plant told me once, I remember, I love this story, that he said the problem with Led Zeppelin is that there were two Capricorns in it, and of course Capricorns have no sense of humour. And the Capricorns were Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones. So there was this interesting schism within Zeppelin, which was these two guys from the Midlands who both did have a great sense of humour, and then Jimmy and John Paul Jones, who were Southerners and really were a little bit kind of dour in their way. John, let's talk a little more generally about your career. I mean, I routinely tell people that you are the funniest writer on popular music that I've ever read, and I absolutely stand by that. I don't think anyone has ever come close in terms of splitting my sides. I genuinely weep with laughter reading many of the pieces you've written right through your career, but particularly the very tongue-in-cheek things that you've written over, I guess, the last 10, 15 years. So you are the featured writer on the homepage this week in our Almost Famous section, and one of the pieces that I've chosen is one I remember reading for the first time very well, because it was pretty much when we were just starting Rock's Back Pages, and you wrote it, I think, for us, or at least offered it to us, and it is an absolutely hysterically funny piece about a Wishbone Ash tribute band called Ashbone You Wish, and it's just written in such a brilliantly deadpan style. Can you remember writing it? Can you tell us about when you hit on that particular mode of ironic appreciation of the absurdities of rock culture?
I think I hit on it very early on. I do remember writing that particular piece. My soon-to-be wife was going to a hen party that night in London, leaving me alone in her dismal flat in Rayners Lane, northwest London. I had to amuse myself somehow, and so began thinking about these tribute bands, and I thought, what a remarkable... Well, now, of course, there's nothing but tribute bands.
Even the bands themselves are
tributes to themselves. Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I've always enjoyed the idea of as British people would say, taking the piss. There was a sort of a famous review in Rolling Stone in late 1969 that Gabriel Marcus was very pleased of, where he'd invented this group called the Mass Marauders. So it sort of sprang from that tradition of just making something up, and Cream was good at that too. I mean, they had one guy, and Richard Meltzer, would famously never actually listen to that which he was reviewing. He would just talk about going to the grocery store and having somebody being rude to him. I always, as I said earlier, I always felt sort of embarrassed about what I was doing, even though I liked the fact that it made me rich and famous and got me laid. So the idea of making fun of it always seemed like a worthwhile thing.
Didn't they actually exist, Ashburn You Wish? There was because after we ran that...
They did, it was a real group.
It was a real group.
They came back to us.
Complaining vociferously
about your write-up. It was fantastic.
They felt they hadn't been taken sufficiently seriously.
And I really hope that your response was, "We stand by what our writers say."
Of course it was, John.
In San Francisco at one point, this guy who called himself Johnny Angel came and interviewed me about my one-man show, my one-man theatrical show. He took no notes and made no recording, went back to the San Francisco Bay Guardian, wrote a piece completely full of fabrications and lies, making me out to be a bigger jerk than I actually am. When I went to the San Francisco Bay Guardian and said, he's quoted my book here. If you can show me where in the book I actually said this, I'll give you every cent I've ever earned or ever will earn, because it wasn't in there. And they said, "We'll stand by what a writer said."
So the other two pieces that we've included here are an early review of Jefferson Airplane. Well, I mean, an early in terms of your writing career, 1969 at the LA Forum. It is wonderfully disdainful of the sort of posturing of Grace Slick and Marty Balin. So there's an early kind of taste of your style there, which is wonderful. There's also the interview you did in 1971 for Rolling Stone with David Bowie. I believe that was his first visit to the States.
It was, yeah.
And I think I'm right in saying that you became, if not firm friends, he became a supporter of yours. He said nice things about the band that you then formed, Christopher Milk. He was a supporter of Christopher Milk.
We ran the audio of a press conference that he did in 1972 in New York, and someone asked him, "What about Christopher Milk?" He said, "Yes, I've heard them."
Yeah, you did get a name check in that audio interview. Maybe just tell us a little bit about Bowie. You write very eloquently at that point about what he represents, the artifice, the theatricality. This is something new. I think it was just on the back of the Man Who Sold the World album. Reminisce, if you would.
Well, he essentially interviewed himself. I was terribly intimidated. He was very smart, and he was really pretty. He was unnervingly pretty, and I was feeling tinglings that I hadn't felt before. And
we were at the ambiguous stage of your sexual development.
No, I'm an American boy, and I was dead set on being 110% heterosexual. But, I was troubled by the fact that I found him really pretty, and he was playing to it too. I mean, he saw it, and he was being very effeminate, and the whole thing served.
Was he wearing a dress?
Of course, yes. He was wearing the dress.
Well, then you can be forgiven. He was pretty, and he was wearing a dress.
What does one wear to an interview? His frock. So, Yeah, so I just sort of sat there and occasionally mumbled something incoherent. So he asked all his own questions and then answered them. And
Perfect.
Yeah. The same thing happened to me with Mick Jagger. I met Mick Jagger. Disc and Music Echo sent me to interview him, and he was disarmingly cordial and sweet and welcoming, and I was so taken aback that I sort of let him interview himself.
I mean, we this week we're running a Robert Duncan interview from '78 from Cream with Bowie, and a very similar sort of thing takes place, because actually Duncan went in pretty sceptical and not a fan, and is utterly disarmed by Bowie, and he comes out sort of saying, "What a nice man," very much. Yeah, and the same thing happens as Bowie starts interviewing himself, because Duncan is unable to formulate questions.
Yeah. Before we talk about Kate Bush, we're definitely going to bring you in on that, John. I would just like to sort of say that there is this sort of pantheon of music writers, especially in the States. One thinks of the so-called noise boys, the unholy trinity of Richard Meltzer and Nick Tosches and Lester Bangs. You're somewhat excluded from that. You weren't part of that gang. You didn't run with those lads. But I think people who really are in the know and know their music writing, their rock criticism, would say you are as important as any of them. But you've always been very much your own man. You've always gone against the grain, I think. You've never taken things as seriously as the likes of Greil Marcus have. You are an utterly singular presence in this story.
Don't give me too much credit, Barney. I'm not nearly as smart as Greil. If I could make the connections he makes in his writing,
I think you are as smart.
You're much more fun to read.
You are much more fun to read. Humour is so incredibly important, and we can't take any of this stuff too seriously, even if music does move us and redeem our sorry existences. But I mean, how do you see yourself in the context of the kind of evolving story of music journalism?
Well, I'm sort, as I say, I'm sort of embarrassed by the whole thing, and I don't like to talk about it. I mean,
welcome
it's
to the
interesting
podcast
that you mentioned that triumvirate and my being apart from them. They were deeply appalling people. It was very, very easy. Well, I didn't know Tosches well, but Richard Meltzer came over to my home in West Hollywood at one point with another music writer, Tom Nolan, who was very good indeed.
Very good. We have him on RBP too, I'm glad to say.
They both had colds, or pretended to have colds, and they expressed their opinion of, their admiration for me by littering my flat with used facial tissue. I mean, they were being sort of as obnoxious as possible, which was, what Meltzer was known for. The record company would invite you to this lavish do. You would attend and stuff yourself with the canapes, yes, and then you would pee in the punch bowl to express your disdain for the whole idea of
canapes,
for the whole idea of the record company having invited you in the first place.
So they were hypocrites. They were
were ghastly. They were ghastly people. So I mean, it wasn't difficult to not want to be associated with them.
You do strike. There's a bit of Groucho Marx about you, John, in that you absolutely would never join any club that you were invited to be part of. Is that fair to say?
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, but I do have extremely high opinions of other bits of other things I do. This isn't one of them.
Well, we love everything you do.
Actually, the one thing that's missing from those three, I loved the unpublished piece of Playboy, Poison the Hood, the NWA story, where I believe you said that it wasn't published because Hugh Hefner imagined Shrewd Knight's boys turning up on his doorstep with baseball bats. But
no, it's much more prosaic than that. They had a piece by or about Ice-T.
Yeah.
And somebody said, "Well, we've got too much gangster rap."
Well, it's a great piece. It is a
terrific.
It's in the Rockstat Pages library, and
also in the first book we ever did, which is, God, sort of so last century now almost, isn't it? The Sound and the Furious, an anthology we did with Bloomsbury. I think we were given some of the crumbs off the Harry Potter table to put together an anthology of music writing, and your piece was one of the centerpieces of that collection. Why don't we talk about Kate Bush? You've written about Kate Bush. You wrote an extraordinary book about her called, certainly in this country, Waiting for Kate Bush.
I wanted to call it Inside Kate Bush.
Oh dear, are we allowed to say that, Jasper? All right, Inside Waiting For. Tell us a little about that book and why it's such a favourite with the Bushettes, the vast global community of Kate's fans.
The story is a simple one, Barney. I was offered some money.
Damn.
The editor at Omnibus Press had a list of people he wanted books about, most of whom I hadn't heard of, others of whom I loathed. I had liked Wuthering Heights. I was going to make some money, and I said, by golly, I'm in.
I'm on board the Bush Express.
The record shows that at the same meeting, I said the same thing about the Pixies, writing about whom was an absolutely excruciating experience because it required me to listen to their recorded output.
I mean, your Pixies book is, if anything, even more notorious, isn't it? And detested by the fans of Fat Francis, or whatever his name is,
yeah.
Black Francis.
As well, it might be. I mean, I realized years after the fact that had I pretended to like them, and really, what did I have to lose? My integrity, my reputation. It might have sold more. I can write fiction. I could have pretended to be. Well, I did. Half of it was fiction because I couldn't fill up the book. I couldn't meet my word requirement. So I wrote a story about a woman who was a Pixies fan and didn't make any value judgments about it.
No.
Because I know some people love it.
Mm. Absolutely. They're certainly among the more unorthodox biographies in the rock canon, shall we say. Let's go back to, you said you liked Wuthering Heights. Now, sort of one of the reasons that I wanted to do something about Kate Bush, whose selected or collected lyrics are published this week by Faber in their series. They've done Van Morrison, I think they've done Ian Curtis and a few others. So it's Kate Bush's turn this Christmas, How to Be Invisible, I think with an introduction by the crime writer Ian Rankin. You said you liked Wuthering Heights. I actually really didn't like Wuthering Heights, and I thought that this was a novelty act, and she would just sort of disappear like so many people who got to number one in England did.
I hated it so much that I didn't listen to her for 2 decades after it was released.
But then what happened after that was I started to hear things on her albums. There's a track called Them Heavy People on Never Forever that really caught my ear in that year. I think it was 78 probably that year. What we've chosen to do with this Free on RBP feature is to focus on the Dreaming album, which I think is one of the most extraordinary records ever made. It was her 3rd album, and it really was Bush just cutting free of any commercial preconceptions or requirements. There were no hit singles on it. It's utterly batty, utterly compelling, extraordinarily exciting and beautiful music. So there's 2 reviews of the album that came out at the time. Some of the reviews were very baffled. Melody makers Colin Irwin and John Young in America for Trouser Press were very approving. And there's 2 interviews about and around the making of the album by Mick Brown in The Guardian and Richard Cook in the NME. I think it was that album, and then the subsequent stuff she did, Hounds of Love, Running Up That Hill, etc., Sensual World, that convinced me, certainly by the end of the 80s, that Kate Bush was about as brilliant as any artist that had ever been produced in pop music, and I still believe that.
It was actually having a very nice young woman called Kate was working with us at Rock's Back Pages about 3 or 4 years back, and she was a huge Kate Bush fan. She'd be playing Kate Bush in the office, and I started listening to it thinking, this is really bloody good. But I'm afraid combination of Wuthering Heights and the fairly ghastly promo video that show on Top of the Pops with her doing sort of fifth form music and movement class sort of moves.
So the obvious
Stop me
question
in my tracks.
The obvious question, John, is did you like anything after Wuthering Heights?
Yeah, I can't tell you the title. There's a song about where she's standing on a balcony in New York. Do you know that one?
Wasn't that every video made in the 80s?
That could be. But it was, I think it was a song dedicated to her late mother, and it's devastating. I mean, it floors me. I mean, a lot of it, she went through what sounded to me like a Munchkin phase that I found deeply annoying, where she was singing in a register that she shouldn't have sung in because it sounded like...
Squeaky.
It sounded comical. Mm. That was deeply annoying, but... I mean, when she hits it, when she nails it to the wall.
I think her, body of work, to use that ghastly term, it stands up incredibly well. I mean, how do you look back on your book now?
The thing was that the deal I made with Omnibus Press was that they acknowledged that she didn't talk to people. So I said, I've got this novel in the works. How about if I incorporate whatever biographical material I'm able to put together into my novel? So I'm to the extent that I remember it, I'm reasonably proud of the novel part, and the rest of it, is
filler.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to write it entertainingly, and I tried to occasionally. I aspire to an interesting insight, but I don't know if there are a great many of them.
Thank you for your thoughts on Kate Bush. We're now going to talk about some of the new pieces that have been added to the Rock's Back Pages library, again, for subscribers. So I'm going to hand over at this point to our chief archivist, Mark Pringle.
Fairly swiftly. Starting in the 60s, again, Dawn James, as you all regular listeners know by now, is one of my favourite writers, interviews Manfred Mann, and you realise really what a rather unpleasant man Manfred Mann is. He was a self-important, pompous blowhard, and it does rather come through. Very nice profile of the wonderful mover and shaker Georgia Gomelsky by Geoffrey Cannon from The Guardian in 1969. Tony Cummings on Gamble and Huff and Black Music 74. Mostly for me, for the information I really didn't know. I didn't realise that Leon Huff had worked for Lieber and Stoller in New York and actually learnt a lot of what he knew about production from working with them and Phil Spector. So there's sort of kind of very nice line through Phil Spector through to Philadelphia Soul.
Did he play on records?
Oh, he did. He played piano.
Piano, exactly.
A Blue Oyster Cult Motorhead Live, reviewed by Jeff Barton in Sounds 75. Jeff Barton's hated Motorhead, loved Blue Oyster Cult. I went to that show. It was about Motorhead's third ever show. Memorable for Larry Wallace, then Motorhead guitar player, trying to tune his guitar with his fuzz box on, and the whole Hammersmith Odeon saying, up, up, down, down. I have no memory of Blue Oyster Cult and remember Motorhead vividly, which probably says more about me than Blue Oyster Cult.
Blue Oyster Cult, it's worth mentioning, of course, were co-produced by another of the, what one might call kind of gonzo era critics, one of the earliest writers in that idiom. Contemporary of Meltzer, wrote for Crawdaddy, Paul Williams' magazine. Sandy Parman and Murray Krugman were the co-producers of the Blue Oyster Cult and some other acts, and of course Combat Rock by The Clash. Yeah. Sandy, I think, did you ever meet Sandy Parman?
No, never.
I mean, genuinely brilliant, I think, in the way that sometimes Meltzer could be brilliant, certainly Bangs could be brilliant, but in extremely kind of irreverent way and subjective gonzoid sort of style. It was all post-new journalism. Sandy died, I think, last year. We're going to try and get his stuff on Rock's Back Pages one day. But I have to say I was a big Blue Oyster Cult fan.
I liked them okay until I saw them live, and I found them so tedious that was the end of my relationship with the Blue Oyster Cult.
I like the fact that there was sort of wit there, and that was partly the input.
It was no wit live. It was just a lumbering, boring bunch of bullocks with guitars around their necks. Moving on, 1976, a delightful profile/interview by Michael Watts with Kate Nana McGarrigle. Kate McGarrigle at that time was still married to Loudon Wainwright III, and she's quoted saying, "Loudon's the only person I've gone up to and said, I really like your music. Needless to say, I won't do it again." It turns out that year they divorced. I think that gives it some context.
Well, we wouldn't have had either Martha or Rufus Wainwright.
Well, indeed. In fact, she was pregnant with Martha at the time.
Right.
I believe Martha was born after the divorce, but I could be wrong about that. Interesting Baltimore Sun, Jeffrey Himes piece on Temptations' attempted reunion in 1982. Which is just sad because the whole thing fell to pieces because Ruffin, who's one of the people interviewed in the piece, basically started missing shows because of his drug problems. Two more things. Sean O'Hagan went to Jamaica in 92 with Massive Attack and Horace Andy to shoot a video. I think they all thought they'd go to some idyllic heaven of reggae sound systems and sunshine, and they walked into the hell that was Kingston in 1992 of cocaine, of murder, and a frankly terrified Sean O'Hagan recounts this rather splendidly. And the last piece is the wonderful Gary Lucas, Beefheart's last guitarist before Beefheart's retirement, interviewed by Mike Barnes for The Wire. Personally, I fascinated me because I think that some of the areas of music I'm interested in at the moment sort of very much coincide with that. So it's a personal thing. So that takes us up to 2000. Anything after 2000, Barney?
Well, I wanted to note, actually, just backtracking slightly to that very early piece that you added about In Excess. Which, so Clinton Walker is one of the Australian writers we have on Rock's Back Pages, and whereas In Excess didn't really make waves here till 7, I would say, is what I'm thinking, 88, 87.
Yeah.
So this is a really early piece.
Yes, though interestingly, they were making waves in America at this point. I mean, this I had no idea. Reading that piece, they'd already toured America twice and were starting to become a sort of significant factor in the States, whilst in the UK they really meant nothing at all at that point. They'd already done 3 albums by that time.
They had. I mean, exactly. They formed late 70s, so this is 1984, but it's by some distance the earliest pieces we've got on them, and it's certainly one of the things that I think gives us satisfaction is to find
early stuff
on artists.
Yeah. It's interesting also that Clinton expresses a certain scepticism towards Hutchence and what he represents, and in a curious kind of way it prefigures the way that In Excess were regarded and treated, certainly by the music press in this country. They were never loved by the press. There was something about In Excess which sort of put, caught in some journalists.
I found them utterly bogus, I have to say. My first wife spent the summer of 88, as I recall it, playing the Kick album repeatedly, and it drove me nearly insane. I just did not care for them. I thought they were just complete poseurs, and its music doesn't stand up for me, but very sad end to Michael Hutchence's life.
Well, a couple of weeks back we ran on Rock's Back Pages Sean O'Hagan's piece in The Observer, I think, about 2 weeks after Hutchence's death, going into the whole thing about Bob Geldof. It was basically about Bob Geldof and how he's been sort of torn from his throne as St. Bob, and was very much about Hutchence and his relationship with Paula, what's her name?
Paula Yates.
Paula Yates.
No, we can't say that. It's definitely Yates. So, well, finally, post 2000, a couple of things just to note en passant. There's a live review of Ariana Grande, or however you pronounce her name, at the O2, pre the atrocities in Manchester. So it's Lisa Verico reviewing Ariana for the Times, and essentially saying she's a great pop star, however formulaic it all seems. And then finally, I would just like to note we've added a lovely Bill Miller tribute / obituary to the late Cliff White, whose audio interviews we've been featuring of late. One of the last things Cliff did before passing away was to let us know that he wanted us to take custody of all his tapes, which include incredible interviews with everyone from Marvin Gaye to Jerry Lee Lewis, and I think we added Smokey Robinson the other day. So Cliff was one of the
James last week.
Etta James last week, indeed, and he's a great interviewer, and he was a lovely man. I knew him pretty well. I certainly read him from an early age. He was one of the few writers for NME who knew their stuff when it came to soul music, R&B. So, there was a Bobby Womack cover story. I'm thinking maybe it was 76, but it might have been earlier than that. Bill Miller, who is another of the great writers on Black American music, and we've had Bill's stuff on RBP for many years, has written this lovely tribute.
What's great about the tribute is that he sort of places both himself and Cliff and one or two others as these white soul boys, R&B fans from the early 60s, going to all these clubs. You get people like Otis Redding playing in a small club in Brixton. I mean, it was extraordinary. American artists coming over. And these guys were just obsessive. They were hoovering everything up. They'd see each other kind of 5 times, 10 times a month, going to see shows. Cliff had a job at HMV where he managed to find a way of actually basically stealing records in large numbers and handing them out to his friends under the guise of the friends being reps from some record company.
That's correct. Bill says that they would walk in and shout, "Polydor sales rep." Cliff would come down and hand them all these records until somebody got wise to this.
He left the job before he could be fired, but it's a very, very nice tribute.
It's lovely, and Bill's just a delightful writer.
As was Cliff.
As was Cliff, and so that's the sort of latest piece. It's an obituary Bill wrote for Now Dig This magazine earlier this year. So that sort of brings the story full circle, really. I'd really love to thank you, John, for coming in today and talking with us. Do you have any parting thoughts? How's this been for you as an experience?
It's been very, very pleasant.
Is it bizarre to you that we're, sitting here after all these years talking about the minutiae of rock writing and so
In
forth?
a way, I find that there are an awful lot of people for whom rock seems to mean, I read a blog, and when I write about when I bare my soul, I might get 100 views. If I put a title on it like The Art of the Rock Star Interview,
you get half a view.
3,000.
Oh.
Yeah. Which I find deeply, deeply upsetting.
But you're always bearing your soul.
So it's your view that I've overbared, and that explains the low readers.
I don't think we've got time to go into on the Rock's Back Pages couch. Anyway, look, it has been such a delight and joy to have you come in today, John. It's always lovely to see you. Are there any Freudian Sluts gigs we should know about? You want to give a shout out?
The Freudian Sluts broke up about a year and a half ago because there's nowhere left to play. Unless you're a tribute band.
Could you be a tribute to the
Jefferson Airplane? To Jefferson
Airplane. Yeah.
You could be Marty Ballin.
If you said that I made fun of Grace Slick and Marty Balin, they weren't even the real culprits. The real culprit was Paul Kantner.
Yeah.
Yes.
What a pompous little twit he was.
He was full of it, wasn't he?
Blows against the empire. One of my favorite lines in all of rock criticism is, somebody reviewed that in Rolling Stone, and he says, if he took handfuls of oatmeal and threw them at the side of the Pentagon, that would roughly have the same amount of force as these blows.
Well, listen, Lovely to see you. Thanks for coming.
I could do an a cappella version of one of my favorite early Zeppelin songs.
Oh yeah, well definitely. So let's all right. So thank you once again for coming in, John Mendelssohn, one of the greats, one of the legends. We're actually going to bow out with a bit of a cappella performance from John. So I'm going to hand over to you now. Thanks everybody. See you next week.
That was this week's Rocks Back Pages podcast guest, John Mendelssohn, with his a cappella rendition of Communication Breakdown by Led Zeppelin. Thank you, John. Your hosts were Barney Hoskyns and Mark Pringle, and the producer was Jasper Murison-Bowie. You can find all the articles featured on the show, and thousands more, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews at rocksbackpages.com. You can find John Mendelssohn's blog at johnmendelssohn.blogspot.com.
Brilliant.
That's absolutely priceless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. That was great.
My great pleasure. Thank you for having me.